Okay, so welcome back to my channel. So today I am going to be teaching you how to do the single crochet. So as you can see here, I already created a chain. If you need help on making the chain, go back to my first video. So how we're going to do the single crochet is you're going to take this first stitch from the hook and you're going to insert your yarn, pull the yarn over and pull it through the first loop on the hook, yarn over, and pull it through both loops on the hook. So that's our first single crochet. So don't worry, we're going to do this many times. So look in here, this is the next space you're going to work into. The next chain over to the left. So you're going to go ahead and insert your hook. Bring the yarn over, always from behind. Pull it through the first loop on your hook. Yarn over, and pull it through both loops on your hook. Okay, so now you can see we have 2 single crochets. We're going to work into this next space, this next chain. We can see that a little bit closer. So right here we're going to insert our hook and do the same stitch again. So one of the hardest parts about learning to crochet, I know for myself and many others, is figuring out where you are inserting your hook to start a stitch. Once the hook is in, it's a little bit of an easier process, but figuring out what hole you're looking for to be the next chain over can sometimes be tricky. So that's why I want to just show you many times today in repetition where you're going next, so it can become more second nature for you. So again, yarn over and pull through both loops here. So look in here, we're going to find our next chain, find the next chain space to put the hook into. So I'm showing you first with this row, because it looks a little bit different when you're putting stitches into the chain row than it does when you're putting it into future rows, like if you already have a row of single crochets that you're working into. So I'm going to show you both. So first, right now, I'm showing you making the singles into the chain stitch row. So again, we put our hook in, yarn over, pull it through just that first loop, yarn over, and pull it through the remaining loops. Sorry, I don't usually work with this thick of yarn, so it's giving me a little bit of difficulty, but you get the general idea. So we're going to continue looking here. I'm going to finish out this row for you here, so I can show you what it looks like in the next row, since it does look a little bit different. Okay, so here's our last single crochet. So what we're going to do, now that we finished that first row of singles, is we're going to do what's called turning your work. So that is just what it sounds like. You're literally going to turn your work over so we can work back in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like zigzagging back and forth. So first we made the row down, and now we're going to go back in the opposite direction. So here's one of the most important parts, is at the beginning of the next row, when you're making single crochets, you need to chain 1. So you might remember the chain stitch we learned in the first video that you used to get your project going. We're just doing one of those. So you chain 1, and then here you can see these spaces I'm pointing to. These are the spaces in the chains that you will be inserting your hook into. So again, that's often one of the hardest parts to figure out, is where you're putting the hook. So that's what I want to show you here. So for this next row, see this kind of V shape here from the top view? How each chain kind of has a V of 2 pieces of yarn? That's the front and the back loop. you want to make sure you're putting your hook in so it's going underneath both of those loops, the front and the back loop. So I'm going to show you again here in this next space. Excuse the background noise. We have my little human's not wanting to nap but being so tired. So here's our next space we're going to put the hook into. See these two front and back loops? It's underneath both of them, and again we grab the yarn and pull it through, and then grab the yarn and pull it through both loops remaining on the hook. So in some types of stitches, once we get a little bit fancy down the road, some stitches will have you working in just the front or just the back of loop that you're seeing here. But in all these basic stitches we're working on, it will be going through both of them. So you see we put our hook in below that V again, yarn over and pull it through one, and then yarn over and pull it through both loops on the hook. So again, finding that space so you know where you're putting your hook into, making sure you're catching both the front and the back loop. Sorry, it's giving me a little bit of difficulty here. I've been having some trouble with this yarn. I usually use pretty thin, less bulky yarn, but I'm actually really liking this color. So if you have any ideas of what I should go ahead and make with this after we're done with all of our instruction videos, go ahead and shoot me a comment below what you'd like to see done with this yarn. So here I'm just going to show you again these spaces. That's the target where we're going. So we're going to go ahead and find that next space, the front and back loop. We're going to go right underneath it. So I wanted to show you this row as well because it is definitely a little bit different than working into that initial chain row. It's the same concept, but it looks a little different on where you're inserting the hook. So future rows, as long as you're just continuing the single crochets, will all look the same to what we're doing right now. Just that basic inserting, pulling through one, looping over and pulling through both. So important in this process here is making sure you're maintaining the same tension. You don't want super tight or super loose stitches. It will, one, make your project kind of difficult to work on, and two, really will create some variety in the appearance. We want all your stitches to look fairly even. There's no such thing as perfection, but as even as we can. So your project, whether it's a scarf, a blanket, whatever you end up with, will look evenly spaced. So here we're coming towards the end of this next row. I'm going to go ahead and finish out for you. And feel free to work ahead or to use the speed changing feature here on YouTube to slow it down if you need, or to pause and catch up so you can practice along with me on making this project. So if you remember here at the end of the row, we do what's called turning our work. So we turn it over to the other side, and you can see the stitches here fairly even, 2 rows of singles. So now if you remember, before we start the row of singles, we always chain 1. So just like that, we're just going to make 1 chain stitch before we begin. So you can see here what we've done so far. So the importance of that chain 1. Sorry, distracted by my toddler here who's playing along. So the chain 1 is really important in order to maintain the width of your project. So as you can see, if you go back to the last 2 rows we made, you would be able to count the number of stitches from left to right, and that number of stitches is maintained from one row to the next. So if we forget to chain one, we are essentially taking a stitch away from that row. So our work, instead of being a nice, evenly spaced project, will be shrinking in width as you go each time that you forget that chain one. Luckily, with crochet, it's pretty easy if you notice that that happens, as it will. It happens to all of us. It's pretty easy to count, to check your work, and to take your hook out and pull on the working yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn and kind of unravel some stitches back to the point where you made your mistake, so we can undo it and start fresh to make sure everything's even. As mistakes happen, but luckily crocheting is pretty forgiving. Pretty easy to go back and change it. So I'll just be finishing up this row here. But I hope that was helpful in showing you what the single crochet looks like and how to use it in your projects. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me so you can follow along with the other stitches we'll be learning.